Hello and welcome back to Exothermic Plays Games. I'm Exothermic and the date today is December 30th, 2024. We're almost there. We've come so far on this journey and I have now made 365 of these videos this year. If it weren't a leap year, we'd be done. There is only one game I like more than this, and even that is like, you know, it's real close. My second favorite game of all time is Final Fantasy IX. Get ready for another long one. Final Fantasy IX might be, for me personally, the most important game on this list other than To the Moon, which, you know, I talked about. But to the context of having played any of it, it could argue it's more important. It was the first game I played that made me fall in love with video games as a medium and an art form. It's like home to me. In fact, I'm just letting the game sit on the title screen right now so you can hear the music from it on the title screen, which is called A Place to Call Home. I say this game is like home to me because anytime I hear this music, I am instantly transported back in time. I'm 6 or 7 years old, sitting on the floor in the basement, playing this game for the first time on a CRT television. I've played through the game to completion at least a dozen times since then, and tried to do something different with it each time, usually involving party composition. But regardless of anything I do differently, the game gives me the same feeling. And no matter how many times I've read the same lines, beaten the same bosses, and watched the same cutscenes, and as a warning, this is a full spoiler video. If you'd like to play through Final Fantasy IX yourself without any major plot spoilers, pause the video, head to the description for the timestamp of the combat mechanics overview, watch that, and then after that, the timestamp for my spoiler light overview at the end. Got it? Good? Awesome. Like I've been doing with other long JRPGs, I'm going to spend a lot of time introducing the characters and early parts of the game, and then we'll just be more or less off to the races. This game follows our hero, our main protagonist, the man with the big tail and an even bigger heart, Zidane Tribal. He is a smooth-talking ladies' man, and yes, that is a tail, and while there are other anthropomorphic people on the planet Gaia, Zidane has never seen another one quite like himself. You're aboard an airship and do some combat tutorials, and then quickly learn he's part of a thieving acting troupe called Tantalus. The crew of Tantalus is coming to the Kingdom of Alexandria to perform a play, but unbeknownst to the royalty, their actual plan is to kidnap the princess. Final Fantasy IX is loaded with little Easter eggs and secret things you can do, and it wastes no time at all giving you opportunities to buy the strategy guide. Because if you tell Baku you think you're supposed to kidnap Queen Braun 99 times in a row, why would you? A woman named Ruby runs into the room, yells at you all for wasting time, and then gives you an equipable accessory named, appropriately, Ruby. Way earlier than you'd otherwise get it. And this is a real thing. I've done this. It's real. I promise you. This isn't finding Mew behind the dumpster or van or whatever the hell it was supposed to be in Pokemon that doesn't exist. But for pretty much the only time we leave Zidane for a bit, we get the actual start of the game, and we get to focus on, and I've been waiting all year to talk about this, a young black mage named Vivi Ornicia. And he is wandering the streets of Alexandria, eager to check out the play. The city of Alexandria is one of my favorite places in these games, and while Zidane may be the protagonist, Vivi's story is really the beating heart of this game. Everywhere you go in Final Fantasy IX, there's something fun that's entirely optional, but gives you little rewards you can do. For example, Vivi can jump rope with these other kids, and if you get a high enough score, you get little rewards, or sometimes big rewards. And the jump rope game is punishing, and I just hate seeing my little buddy fall on his face, so I've never really pushed for the big reward. He tries to redeem his ticket for the play, but is told that it's fake, and he's absolutely crushed. So then he runs into this little rat kid who teams up with you to sneak into the play, and off you go, being Alexandria's most petty criminal. I've talked about some of my favorite characters on this channel. I've talked a lot about Kirby. I've gave glowing praise on Final Fantasy XII's character Balthier. I said that Mass Effect's Mordin Solus has one of the most dynamic character arcs ever written, but my favorite video game character ever made is Vivi. I dare anybody to play this game all the way, or at least most of the way through, and not absolutely adore him. Personality-wise, he's this shy little faceless ball of anxiety and self-doubt, and I want to give him a big hug. But as for why he's my favorite, I'll start with, I love black mages in Final Fantasy games. I just love a little guy that casts a bunch of spells, and like the black mage design in the original Final Fantasy is like one of the greatest character designs of all time. But that's not really the reason, and you'll just have to see when we get there, and we'll get there. Once Vivi and the Rat Kid make their way to the rooftop view of the ship, we switch back to Zidane and Tantalus. The plan is to put on the play, I Want to Be Your Canary, which is basically just Shakespeare. Like, the in-universe author is a dude named Lord Avon, which is clearly a reference to Stratford-upon-Avon, the birthplace of Shakespeare, and the dialogue, plot, and tone of the play are all right there with Hamlet or Romeo and Juliet, too. I actually really like what they do with the play in the game, getting to fight Baku and use special effects that are meant to be spells but actually do 0 damage is a great touch, and of course, like most things in the game, there's another mini-game. Seriously, the game is crawling with them, and I love that about this game. Zidane and Blank are meant to go kidnap Garnet, while the main parts of the play are happening, and to set that up, they have a little duel in front of the audience, and then run after each other to enter the castle. The duel is basically a quick time event sequence, and it's fun and fairly cinematic, especially when you do like your little backflip, and the music! Vamos a la Flamenco is terrific, and really, I do want to touch more on the music for this game. Just a couple days ago in my Final Fantasy X ranking, I mentioned the ending theme is the best thing that Nobuo Uematsu has written as like an individual piece of music, but his best overall score and soundtrack is definitely Final Fantasy IX to me. For starters, this game is pretty long. It's 4 discs long, and he wrote a ton of music for it. There's 110 tracks listed on the official album, though admittedly, the game makes very heavy use of leitmotifs, so there's a lot of repetition of melodies and overlapping bits, but it's brilliantly done. Even just that title track I was talking about earlier shows up several times in different ways throughout the game, and it's a huge narrative clue before you even understand why. The game's narrative is so tied to music. I've beaten this game at least a dozen times, as I mentioned, and there's a boss late in the game that I didn't realize until I was listening to the soundtrack earlier this year, has the dramatic music from I Want to Be Your Canary woven into it is a continuation of the foreshadowing from the play's plot into the broader narrative of the game itself, because I Want to Be Your Canary does foreshadow some things about the game here, but with little twists and turns that are different, and I think the story is just so intricately orchestrated, and it's little details that have me coming back time and time again like this, discovering something new to love about this game with every single playthrough. But also, thanks to the amount of times I've done this, I've gotten pretty good at this duel with Blank, and if you do it perfectly and quickly, you get a great score with the nobles and impress the queen, getting a huge reward for it. But that's not why we're here. You head on into the castle, drug some guards, steal their armor, and head off to go drug the princess as well. Only something unexpected happens. She runs into you first. Zidane, being his normal flirtatious self, starts striking up conversation, partially to stall, partially because he swears he recognizes her in some other way than just being the princess, like he feels something familiar about her, but she slips away and we have to chase after her. We get a little clip introducing 2 little jester dudes that'll matter a lot more, but their names are Zorn and Thorn, and they're pretty funny antagonists with the way they banter with each other, and I love their music. But then, we get another one of my favorite characters in this game, the leader of the Knights of Pluto, the Royal Guard, Captain Adelbert Steiner. He's one of the main sources of comedic relief in the game, but he's also extraordinarily bound by duty to protect the princess to the ends of the earth, and he is so prepared to do just that. Final Fantasy IX has a charm and whimsy that I appreciate every time I play it, and Steiner embodies all of that. He's silly and goofy and very funny, though not necessarily like comedic through dialogue, but through his cartoonish expressions and antics. But beneath that surface lies a deeply serious man with a greater understanding of the world than you would expect from a guy so, at times, impressively dumb. And that, I think, is true of much of the game as a whole, especially when you compare it to the more modern, serious settings and stories of the previous two entries in the franchise. But once we're inside the ship, it's revealed that while we were trying to kidnap the princess, she was trying to get kidnapped. It's a pretty fun twist that does a lot to, kind of right away when we're really meeting this character for the first time, show us that she's not afraid to march to the beat of her own drum and take matters into her own hands. She's not just this dainty princess sipping tea or whatever, and is willing and ready to fight for what she needs to. Which is good, because, oh man, do we need to fight now? Our chase has led us to escaping onto the stage, and we kind of just interrupt the whole play, but need to do some improvisation to keep the audience, and more importantly, the queen, from suspecting anything. She's a natural actor, and they improvise a tragic death that is so believable, Steiner actually thinks they stabbed her. Vivi's path meets up with the others when the guards catch up with him for trespassing, and in running away from them, he also runs up onto the stage and accidentally lights Garnet's cloak on fire. Throwing it off, she reveals she's alive, and just, man, Steiner is going through it. But now, the queen realizes what's going on, of course, and tries to shoot us out of the sky with her daughter on board. Real smart. I do think it's really cool that the cannon that fires doesn't actually shoot like a cannonball or a mortar or anything like that, but one of the iconic Final Fantasy monsters, a bomb. Get it? Because it's gonna explode? Guess what? It explodes. And our ship crashes into the evil forest. That's not me describing the tone of the forest or whatever. It's literally called the evil forest. Most people are accounted for, but Zidane sets out to find our other party members. We find Garnet trapped by some plant monster and beat it up alongside Steiner, but it gets away, and then Vivi gets captured, and we beat that one up too, and manage to actually kill it, with the help of Vivi's fire magic. Back at the ship, helping Steiner and Vivi to recover, Baku advises against going out to save Garnet, because it's probably a suicide mission in this forest, but Zidane's going out there anyways. With your thief, knight, mage trio, you head out to rescue the princess. She's being held by this scary giant plant monster, and you beat that up too, with Blank tagging along at the end. But then, there's this swarm of monsters, and at first it seems like they're wanting to kill you, but then it becomes apparent they seem to be going somewhere in the process, and actually, they're trying to escape. Because after a close call, Blank saves the Dane's monkey ass, and the entire forest and everybody left within it is petrified, with our party escaping thanks to Blank's bravery and selflessness. We do later learn that the rest of the Tantalus crew also got out due to something that Blank helped them with too, and it's a pretty cool action sequence. Recovering from that whole ordeal, we have to figure out what to do next. Steiner, of course, wants to return Garnet to Alexandria, but she obviously doesn't want to go back, so for the meantime, we need to get somewhere, anywhere with a warm bed. There's really only one place to go right now, and that's the Ice Cavern. This is another one of my favorite places in the game. It does a lot of things. It starts layering on more combat, although at a controlled rate, only running into them if you step into mist. And I do want to touch on the music here too. Do you know how refreshing it is to play a role-playing game with a wintry, cold place that is defined by being wintry and cold, and the music doesn't have any sleigh bells? It's not just the typical icy dungeon kind of music, but I think it still sells the atmosphere of the place. At some point, near the exit, the whole party starts to fall asleep, which is obviously terrible in a freezing blizzard, but Zidane manages to wake up and finds the source of their amnesia, a deranged black mage that refers to itself as Black Waltz Number 1. We don't know a lot about them yet, but this fight showcases something about the game, but it's not obvious unless you're already in the know. Many bosses in Final Fantasy IX can be pretty difficult, or at least much more difficult than absolutely everything else around it, making for an uneven difficulty curve, but also making for big, epic fights. But what's funny is that most of those have something that trivializes the fight. In the very first fight of the game, when you're learning how to do the most basic combat functions against Baku inside the theater ship, you have 4 people that can steal, and you should do that until he's got nothing left to steal, because that is how you can get a Mage Masher, a pretty good dagger for Zidane to use, and can't normally get until later in the game. If you have Mage Masher against the first Black Waltz, it basically makes it a cakewalk, because all of the real damage you take in that fight is from spellcasting, and Mage Masher can silence enemies on hit, making it so they can't cast spells. That's just one thing, but it goes on and on and on. Later in the game, there's a big undead boss you're fighting, and it's incredibly difficult, but you can actually skip the fight by using a Phoenix Down, the resurrection item, on the undead boss, killing it instantly. The game is just overflowing with things like this that encourage you to explore and just try things, and that's a lot of the charm of the boss fights to me. But once you're out of there, you see a village on the horizon and are ready to collapse into the bed of an inn. But first, Zidane proposes that Garnet assume a new identity. After all, we can't have people tipping off the authorities that we've kidnapped a princess. Inspecting a weapon that Zidane drops during the ensuing argument with Steiner about this, she decides to call herself Dagger, and tries learning more colloquial language to not sound like she's from nobility. There's a lot of funny scenes about that and little jokes throughout the next several sections of the game, but it's something that Dagger really works at and tries her best to fall into this role, although she doesn't always succeed. It's nice she does have to try, I think, and we see her mistakes and successes along the way, making her a more lifelike character, at least to my eyes. So we head into one of my favorite places in any game ever. The village of Dali. For starters, I absolutely adore the music here, in this simple farming village. It's one of the most relaxing pieces of music I've ever heard in my life. At my wedding, we picked this song to play before the ceremony started, just on a loop, as an ambient thing while people socialize or whatever. It's terrific. To go along with this, it's the first time, really, we get a break in the action and intensity of the plot so far, getting to just interact with the locals and explore this very, very tiny fantasy town. It's like 5 buildings. And there's also almost nobody there. Actually, where is everybody? There's kids running around, but virtually no adults, including in the shops. And why are these people so nervous around Vivi? I said I'd get to why I love Vivi more than any other character ever, and I'm ready to talk about it. He gets abducted in this small town, and we eventually figure out he's in this large underground facility along with all of the rest of the town. The other town people didn't get abducted, though. They're paid to be there. We find all sorts of crazy machines, and it's an underground factory making eggs? Well, that's pretty weird. I wonder what they hatch into. Oh, they hatch into fully grown black mages. Vivi had never really seen anything else that looked like him, with the pitch black, featureless body, except for the bright yellow and glowing eyes. We discover that they're being manufactured by Alexandria to be used as soldiers, weapons of war, and as we're nearly caught, we accidentally get packaged up alongside them. Steiner had gone off to investigate for a way to get back to the castle and found out there was a cargo ship, so he wasn't really with the rest of us at this point, but that's very fortunate because he also finds and rescues us. We decide it's time to hijack this airship and board the thing. Once on board, Vivi immediately begins trying desperately to interact with the other black mages, and they're totally unresponsive, like lifeless machines, puppets to their master's will. This is the start to Vivi's incredible journey of struggling with his identity and the shared connection with his people regarding their free will, independence, and eventually emotional fulfillment. But the little guy is going through it. I'm going out of order here for a bit to expand on this and spoil a bunch of Vivi's story, because he is really just so incredible. I skipped over the second Black Waltz fight because it's very easy and not that interesting, but the third Black Waltz is by far the strongest and is a really fun fight marked by Vivi's involvement. When it shows up on the ship to take Garnet back to Alexandria by force, the regular black mages, previously not even showing any recognition of Vivi's existence, all unanimously band together to protect him, and it's this great, touching moment, but ultimately, the Black Waltz kills them all, including the ones in storage, sending them all plummeting, lifeless, without even the yellow glow of their eyes, to the ground. Over the course of the game, we learn a ton about Vivi and these black mages. Vivi believes he is 9 years old, but he's really only like 2 or 3, and he was actually the prototype developed for the Black Mage program, but had way too much free will and was thus discarded. He would have died had he not been fished up by his then adoptive grandfather, though there's a fun wrinkle with that I'll touch on later, and then started traveling the world a bit after his grandfather died, bringing us to the start of the game. Over the course of the game, Alexandria declares war on pretty much the whole continent, and it's terrible, the wrath and destruction that these black mages unleash, but eventually we do liberate them and create a new home for them on another continent. This is called Black Mage Village, and over time, these once mindless pawns begin to open up and accept emotion and really feel for the first time, as Vivi and the rest of the party helps guide them on this journey of theirs. But then slowly, they start dying, and they grieve and feel loss in a different way than they've ever felt before, and the Black Mages are all feeling it, and Vivi discovers that they were made with planned obsolescence. They were only meant to last so long as tools of war, and they will not be long for this world. Vivi's internal struggles really peak with this revelation as he slowly starts to come to terms with the concept of life and death and his own mortality, largely with Zidane's help, which is especially great storytelling, which I'll get to later. Being a prototype, he seems to have a longer lifespan than the others, but there's no guarantee he won't shut down soon too, having been alive longer than them already. But he decides to make the best of it and do whatever he can to help the world. That's a pretty big task for someone that's developmentally about 9 years old, and kicking this Black Waltz's ass is a great first step. Alright, are you ready to actually talk about mechanics in this video about a game? Combat in Final Fantasy IX is pretty straightforward, though every character is different. You have a basic attack, you might cast different kinds of magic, which can often be single target, or you can press a shoulder button to target all enemies or all allies, though not everything can. You also might have another non-magic thing as well, like Zidane can use thieving skills, Steiner can use sword arts, which are things like armor break that messes up enemies when he hits them. Garnet, though not until later in the game, is a summoner and can bring forth powerful eidolons that are basically just little cutscene and then a powerful spell after it. They're admittedly not that fancy or complicated, but they're still pretty cool. Also cool is how some characters can interact with each other, like how Steiner pairs up with Vivi to have another set of attacks only if Vivi is in the party, where Vivi casts a spell on Steiner's sword, and then we get to do all sorts of elemental damage with our normally very physical guy. One of the biggest ways that other people are different, however, is trance. If you've played Final Fantasy VI, this will visually look familiar to you because it's playing off of Terra's big power spike that happens from heightened emotions, only everyone gets to eventually do this in this game. It's not just one. Some boss fights trigger trance automatically for specific characters based on the story, and this one against the Black Waltz triggers Vivi's. Everyone is different, other than everybody gets heightened stats during it, but Vivi can cast 2 spells as one turn, which allows for some pretty insane amounts of damage on top of the spells already hitting harder because of his stat bump. Zidane can unleash powerful attacks that make no sense for a thief to have, but are explained later. Dagger gets more powerful summons with longer and cooler animations. Steiner actually just hits like a bus. That's it. He hits really hard. There's more with the other characters, and everyone is pretty unique and exciting in their own way. I really like how Trance feels like limit breaks and generally even more powerful, but the meter is also way slower to charge and it happens automatically, so you can't really control when it happens, which sometimes is disappointing, but can cause you to change your battle strategy when it starts to get close to maximize your use of it, and that's fun in its own way. Trance also is far from the only thing that's got Final Fantasy VI in its bones either. The story does focus on a war between a magic-based society and a technology-based society, though the roles of aggressor and protector are flipped, and it's got a fairly large, though not as large, ensemble cast where every character fills into some more traditional job structure, and you can learn all sorts of cool abilities that you get to pick from the rate and distribution of them via equipment. You never learn new abilities from characters leveling up in Final Fantasy IX, instead gaining them from the things you equip. Each character has different things they can learn, rooted in their job they draw inspiration from, but once you equip the gear, you can use it. From combat, in addition to earning experience, you also earn points that contribute to all of the skills from your current equipment until eventually you master them, no longer needing the gear for it, and you can move on to learning the next thing from the next piece of gear. It's terrific in my absolute favorite way that any game has ever made me improve my characters, making gear a far more interesting choice than just stat upgrades and maybe the occasional added effect, right? Like on-hit things for weapons. Skills and spells are also, they're just there, and once it's equipped, you can use them. But there's a ton of passive abilities you can learn, and you have to spend these ability points to equip those, only getting to do so many. Early on, you just kind of equip everything and call it a day because you can afford to, but later on, things get more intricate, and you can really start crafting a playstyle because you only have so many points to spend. There's a lot of ways to construct your party, especially in the later stages of the game after you have your own airship and can go everywhere with everyone. Maybe you want a party without a traditional healer. You can equip everyone with auto-reflect, so enemy spells will always just bounce back at them, which is a great defensive thing, since you won't be casting support stuff on yourself, and you can equip Amarant, a brutish monk dude you recruit, with healer, causing his attacks to actually heal things instead of damage them, making him secretly the best single target healer in the game. Throw Chemist, increasing item-based recovery effects like potions on everybody else, and you're good to go. This is admittedly a more extreme example of how to break apart from the traditional party setups, and I've beaten the game with most party compositions at this point, and every character is fun to play and interesting with just enough overlap across one or two on different things that can basically make anything work. If you try hard enough while not feeling anyway like it's all just the same. But really, my favorite composition is just the classic. These four characters. Zidane, who you always have to have Zidane, you can't not have him. Steiner, Vivi, and Dagger offer, I think, the most versatile damage output with defensive and support abilities when you need them. So yeah, that's combat in Final Fantasy IX. Oh, and if you play this game, a common complaint is that the combat is slow, and admittedly, it is, especially at the start, but once you get those cooler abilities, it's more interesting, like the one that lets Vivi's magic do tons of extra damage if it was cast off Reflect, creates some really fun strategic wrinkles you can do, but I think a lot of those complaints are because people didn't know to dig through the game's settings, and admittedly, you shouldn't have to, but also, you absolutely have to. The default settings for the game's combat are awful, though they were great for 6-year-old EXO. If you play, jump in there, bump up the combat timer speed, bump up the combat text speed, change ATB to active so other people keep loading while you're selecting stuff, set movement to run by default, and change the cursor option to memory, making it easier to spam the same moves when you need to. This does a lot and drastically improves the game. If you jumped to combat from the timestamp, now's the time for you to head to the end, so I'll see you there. The rest of you, come with me! Vivi gets his revenge on the Black Waltz, and we make it through to the kingdom of Lindblum, which is not only Zidane's hometown, but also where Dagger wanted us to take her. I love Lindblum. This city is so cool. It's a big, technologically powered place with the Regent, Sid, having designed all of the engines and tech that make airships work. Dagger's there to meet with Sid about some concerns regarding her mother, which I've already talked about Alexandria going to war, so I guess that cat's out of the bag already. And then we finally go to meet with Sid. It turns out he's an Oglop. They're these disgusting little bug creatures that we've seen in a couple comedy bits already in the game. But basically, his ex-wife stole his biggest, fanciest airship and cursed him into being an Oglop. So that's pretty awesome of her. It turns out Sid was already aware of some of Queen Braun's machinations and is working on some countermeasures, but apparently Oglops have less brain matter than humans. Who knew? In the meantime, we can chill in Lindblum. There's a system throughout this game called active time events. Basically, they're little scenes we get to watch away from Zidane of other characters just going about their business. These are usually optional and aren't relevant to the main story, but they're all great and offer more context to things and room for character development and subplots that you might miss out on otherwise. I love all of these, and it's some of the best dialogue writing and just little character fluff bits that have ever been in any role-playing game. There's different sectors to the city, and there's all of these little nooks and crannies, and it's just so vibrant and full of life. The synthesis shop is here too, and that place is really important. Basically, Final Fantasy IX instilled in me a total fear of ever selling anything in any JRPG, absolutely ever. You could turn older equipment and sometimes other items into newer, better stuff, and for much of these, synthesis is the only way to get them, and with gear being how you learn new skills, it's actually almost necessary to do this. I appreciate that it makes every item fun and interesting after I've stopped using them, and also makes it not feel just awful when I spend a ton of gil on new gear, only to find that same gear in a chest like 10 minutes later in a dungeon, because I can at least likely use that for synthesis before I replace the gear that I had just bought. But anyways, there's a festival in town, and it's rooted in the history of the kingdom, releasing a ton of monsters into the streets for people to compete and hunt them down. The outcome doesn't matter other than determining what kind of prize you get. Competing alongside you is an old friend of Zidane's named Freya. She's the dragoon I mentioned earlier, and yes, she's a rat person. Her people come from the kingdom of Bermesia, and that is a cool place. I did want to touch on what makes Freya so cool in combat. She has the ability Jump, which allows her to leap up into the sky somewhere, and she'll stay up there for a while and eventually then come crashing back down with her spear, doing massive damage. While this removes her from combat for several turns, you might think that's a downside, but it's actually the reason to do it. She's safe from harm while up top, and actually if you're smart with this, you can dodge entire massive, devastating attacks from bosses, making her the linchpin of a more defensive-oriented team. Her trance mode modifies her jump to stay up there even longer and makes several attacks, raining spears down from above. It's pretty cool. Less cool, Alexandria has made their move sooner than anticipated and is currently in the process of wiping Bermesia off the map. Most of the group is eager to go over and help, including Dagger, but everyone agrees it's way too dangerous and she needs to stay in Lindblum, where she's actually safe. Yeah, she hates that plan and drugs you all except Steiner, and the two of them depart as we later learn to Alexandria to go convince Braun to stop this madness. Spoiler, that doesn't work. So the remaining three of Zidane, Vivi, and Freya head out towards Bermesia to try and save the kingdom. Okay. This is the part where the game opens up and you're not really on tracks anymore. I love the overworld of Final Fantasy IX, especially the music. It's a great big world of adventure and it's all yours to go out and explore. There's a number of things we can do here, but the first thing you should do is get a fourth party member. There's a marsh not far from Lindblum called Ku's Marsh, and that's where you find the weirdest party member you'll ever have in a Final Fantasy game. Kus are a very strange people with massive tongues, like think Lickitung, right? And maybe even bigger stomachs. You find Kina, a young, naive Ku chasing frogs, but importantly, you find an elder Ku, and this is startling to Vivi. Remember I mentioned Vivi's grandfather? Well, it turns out that he was a coup and looks exactly like this one did, though they're not the same person. There's an optional place you can discover in the world that was Vivi's home with his grandfather, and in exploring that, it's implied that this was not really his adoptive grandfather per se, but rather just an eccentric, hungry coup that thought Vivi might actually taste really good and was protecting him while he figured out how he could cook him. It's some wild stuff. But not as wild as Kina. He agrees to join you on your journey on the premise of getting to travel the world and try all sorts of new foods, though his favorite is still frogs. There's yet another little mini game here, and you can catch them to receive bonuses if you catch enough, but don't catch them all because you'll still need them to reproduce and restock the pond. Regarding combat, Kina is a blue mage, but not like any you've seen before or since. His weapon is a big-ass fork, and of course, like any blue mage, has respectable physical combat skills and learns magic not like everyone else, but from the monsters. Unlike other blue mages, once enemies are low enough in health, Kina can eat them whole. One go, just opens up that maw and down the gullet. There's an enemy in this game that's a literal house. In Kina's trance, upgrades eat to cook. We weren't even cooking these things. Basically, this does two things. The first is it massively increases the range that you can eat stuff as far as like health remaining and stuff, but also allows you to eat things you otherwise wouldn't be able to. There's a boss later in the game that you can cheese. Basically, it only does ground-based attacks, and that's like the big thing you have to deal with, and it's a big thing to deal with. But if you equip Kina with an ability called Auto Float that you learn from some of your equipment, the attacks just miss every single time, and Kina can solo the fight. But importantly, if you set up right to be able to trigger Kina's trance when the boss is low on health, you can cook the boss and learn Earthquake. That's the only way to learn that spell, and it's crazy that you can do this. Now that we've got most of our party and are onto the real meat of this game's story with the warmongering from Alexandria, it's time we take off the training wheels and blitz through the rest of this plot. You head to Bermesia. It's a beautiful kingdom, though often dark and rainy, and there's just death and destruction littered everywhere. It's Freya's turn to go through it now. Once you get to the palace, you find an agent of Alexandria, a mysterious man that, as we learn, has a tail like Zidane, so that's exciting and terrifying for him, and also a mystery. His name is Kuja, and he's the real antagonist for most of the game. He just wipes the floor with us, sets his sights elsewhere on his big dragon, and flies away. Meanwhile, Garnet's and Steiner's efforts to convince the Queen to call off the war has backfired spectacularly, and Zorn and Thorn have imprisoned them, and they performed a ritual that extracts all of the Eidolons that the princess could summon, which she didn't even know yet that was a thing she could do, and give that ability to Queen Bran. There's a lot of running around, and Bran shows up to Clara, a smaller kingdom that was previously protected by Bermesia, to test out her newfound power, obliterating the entire kingdom in one fell swoop. And it's obvious she's going for Lindblom next. Despite our best efforts to get there in time, including reuniting the fractured party, we're just too late, and Bran summons another Eidolon that destroys much of the city. We can't really save it, at least not at this time, but Cid sends us on a covert mission to another continent where Kuja's been getting what he needs to make the Black Mage army. While there, we discover a whole lot of things amongst the ruins of ancient civilizations, with small pockets of life still existing, and we find Aiko, the last remaining resident of the Summoner Village. And it turns out that Garnet is also from there. In fact, they are sisters, and that's why she had the connections with those Eidolons and were able to repair them afterwards. Remember that ruby that you got if you said you were kidnapping Queen Bran 99 times in a row? That's how you learn to summon Carbuncle for Aiko. She's also a summoner, though just starting to be able to harness that power. In combat, she's very similar to Dagger, but focuses more on healing and defensive things and less on offensive summons, but her trance is also double white, like Vivi's, but for white magic, so she does a lot more healing and general party support. But I prefer having Dagger, because I like being able to do something offensive when I don't need the support. Anyways, we've got to stop the outpouring of mist from the Aoife tree and run into Amaranth, the monk I mentioned earlier. There's not a lot going on with Amaranth other than he's really cool. And he wants to be stronger, and Zidane keeps kicking his ass, so he travels with us to learn from him. Basically, Zidane teaches him that friendship is magic. We kill the Aoife tree boss with that Phoenix Down trick I mentioned, but then Bronze shows up to confront Kuja, who had been following us because he's done his job and needs him out of the way because she justifiably considers him a threat. She summons the big, bad Eidolon, Bahamut, and, well, that was a mistake. Kuja has access to this giant airship called the Invincible, and it has technology that can capture and enslave Eidolons, and he wipes out Bronze's whole fleet. She has a last moment of clarity, realizing all the horrible things she's done, and apologizes to Garnet, giving her the tools we need to defend Alexandria, as Kuja is obviously on his way there. The assault on Alexandria is rough, but together Aiko and Garnet summon Alexander, the giant ancient defender of the city, which it's obviously named for, but Kuja is just gonna capture it with the ship, like Bahamut, duh. But then a mysterious man commandeers his ship, steals it away from him, but also destroys Alexander, and Kuja is forced to retreat. There's a lot that happens that I'm gonna skip, essentially. But basically, we get captured by Kuja on yet another continent and have to do his dirty work. Here's a tip for when you get to Ibsen's castle and you go on this mission for Kuja. He can't go there because his magic doesn't work there. In fact, any magic doesn't work there. That's why he's sending you. What I'm saying is, once you're there, you're stuck there until you're done. And don't bring Vivi. Made that mistake once, never making it again. You're gathering artifacts for Kuja for something, and also head to another ancient castle once you're free of him to learn more. Ibsen's castle and Oilvert, interestingly, have the same music, but different. It's the music from the title screen, actually. This melody appears in several sections of the game, and it's because all of those sections are connected to each other, because they're all related to the same ancient civilization, because of its affiliation with the source of this music, another planet. We learn that Kuja and Zidane are brothers from another planet. They are aliens, and were actually sent there to be the harbingers of death, destroying all life on Gaia, so it could be sucked up by the Aoife tree, which links the two planets together spiritually to fuse them into one planet, melding together so their species, called genomes, could live in prosperity again because their planet, Terra, is dying and devoid of most natural resources. Yeah, it's a whole big thing, but ultimately something went wrong when Zidane was sent down by Garland, the guy that commandeered Kuja's ship, and he forgot his mission, instead wandering and being found and saved by Tantalus, so he sent Kuja to clean up Zidane's mess. This is why his trance gives him these crazy powerful magical abilities. The genomes are basically, at this point, devoid of souls as well, and are meant to claim the ones from the dead in Gaia. This is a fascinating parallel to Vivi's story regarding his mortality and being a construct of evil, but being able to find the good in his heart and show the way to all of his Black Mage brethren to also cherish life and find the good in their hearts and maintain and develop their own free will and independence. And while it takes him a little while to see the light, Zidane aims to do the same for the genomes. But first, Garland gets to him and kind of drains that ambition and optimism out of him. This is my favorite sequence in this entire game, and the music is phenomenal, the fighting is great, the dialogue is great, it's all great. But we kill Garland, and Kuja starts blowing up the planet. We rescue all of the remaining genomes and take them back to Black Mage Village, where the two groups can learn together what it is to truly be alive and find their own souls. It's awesome, and I love it. And then we go stop Kuja, but he opens a giant portal to like a weird dimension called Memoria that messes with all of our memories and stuff as the great big final dungeon of the game. It's really a big dungeon. And I love Memoria. It's so cool, there's so many hidden things like optional extra bosses, and if you get to this within 12 hours, which good luck, you find Steiner's ultimate weapon, which is crazy and literally the only thing I have not yet done in this game. But then you defeat Kuja, and he goes into trance, and you beat him again, and then the God of Death just appears, and you kill that too, which makes no sense, and is one of the worst final bosses of actually any JRPG ever, because there was no mention of it ever, at any time. Just absolutely nothing. And it didn't need to be there, but oh well. What are we splitting hairs over? The game's over. The place is blowing up, and Zidane is too good of a person and feels compelled to save Kuja because he's his brother, and presumably he tragically dies going back in. Some time passes, and there's a little monologue about people going their separate ways, and we get little cutscenes about how Zidane has impacted everybody's lives. Garnet's the queen now, and things are going well with her, and everybody's on their way to Alexandria to see each other again for the first time in a long time. And this isn't obvious in the English version of the game, but the narrator here is Vivi. Apparently, in the Japanese version, he had some mannerisms and structural differences to his speech that made it clear, but I don't read or speak Japanese, so I am choosing to believe people on the internet on that one. Don't correct me if I'm wrong. Sadly, Vivi is not there. He, like other black mages, expired, and he thanks Zidane for giving his life meaning and being able to make the most of it. But when everyone is together for another performance of I Want to Be Your Canary, which, by the way, there are little black mages, they don't explain this that I can ever find, but Vivi had kids, maybe? There are more black mages now. They're not just extinct as a people. There's a bunch of little tiny Vivis running around, and they're really cute. But in the play, the lead, it turns out this time, is Zidane. Garnet rushes out into the crowd, hurls herself into his arms, and they get to be together, and we get this great big happy ending, and everything's terrific, and, you know, there's no, like, real thing of, like, oh, well, they saved the day, but, you know, what cost, well, no, it's a happy ending. Let me have this, damn it. And that's the game. There's pretty cool subplots I didn't talk about, like Beatrix, the other captain of the guard for Alexandria, is super awesome, and her music is also phenomenal. Or the entire city of Treno, which is basically Las Vegas in Final Fantasy. And there's a lot more to do in Final Fantasy IX than just the story, and if you really care about that stuff, at some point I plan to do a big, like, whole day live stream of attempting to get Excalibur 2, that weapon for speedrunning the game. And, you know, you'll be able to see that there whenever that happens. Maybe that'll be this coming year. Maybe it'll be like a decade from now. I don't know. I'll do it eventually. But there's more than just the story here. I talked a lot about minigames, but there's a couple more that I spent a lot of time with. Tetramaster is a very bad card game with math that doesn't math, and it's addicting and fun because you lose your cards if you lose and gain theirs if you win. So it's almost like gambling with light strategy, and there's a lot of stuff to collect. But the big mini game is Chocobo Hot and Cold. Basically, you go digging around in Chocobo's forest and look for buried items, and depending on how close you are, it'll make a different sound, and you have a little timer for it. But one of the kinds of items you can find is Chocograss, which gives you picture clues to hidden treasures out in the overworld map, and you can dig those up with your Chocobo too. As you keep doing this, you'll get to upgrade your Chocobo until it can run in rivers or over mountains and even fly, eventually getting a Chocobo society hidden way up in the clouds, and it's so cool. And there's the big fat Chocobo, and this is how you find a number of the best items in the game, and it's a ton of fun, and the actual reason I haven't completed an Excalibur 2 run, because eventually I inevitably go, you know what? I'm just gonna play some Chocobo Hot and Cold for like the next 5 hours. Final Fantasy IX is the most charming story I've ever experienced in my life. The world is brilliant. I love the whole cast of characters. Like, seriously, I think this has the best party of any RPG ever made. Obviously, there's Vivi, but everyone else is so great. The soundtrack is the best of any game ever. The use of leitmotifs is phenomenal. The art design, while lacking in fidelity compared to modern games, I think still holds up remarkably well. And that's in part because of how they did the backgrounds. They used much higher resolution background art for each location than the PlayStation could actually handle, and then it compressed down from there, which still wound up looking fine on a CRT television, of course. But then, when you play things like the later PC ports, port or emulators, the background art still holds up just as well because they were already done at high definition. I love the campiness, the quirky parts of the world, and how it holds up with the story elements. It's just, damn. Every single time I play this game, I'm enraptured and fall in love with it all over again. And every single time I come away with it with a bigger appreciation than I even had before. But if you want to see what tops that, you can join me tomorrow as I talk about my absolute favorite game ever made, and hell, it's about time.